director of such films as Henry V, Dead Again, Much Ado About Nothing. Yes, I know, right? He is also, of course, a BAFTA winner, a 3-time SAG Award nominee, and the first person to be nominated in 5 different academies for 5 different Academy Awards. Wow. He has a court show. To Laurence Olivier, and most important, he's Gilderoy Lockhart. Please welcome Kenneth Branagh. You know, I'm sort of amused because I have to imagine a response like that follows you everywhere you go, like you go into Starbucks and...
No, not quite.
Please don't crush this dream of mine.
No, there are many responses. That's a beautiful response. Yeah. Thanks so much. You're the third group of people to see this film. Thank you very much.
And actually, this is an audience of SAG actors. Everyone here is a SAG dues paid up. You wouldn't be here. So I'd also like to start by asking, how did you get your SAG card?
My SAG card came through nearly 30 years ago, actually, when I had the great privilege to come here and work on a movie called Dead Again. Yeah, it was a great thrill. It still remains a great thrill, actually. And so, yeah, I'm a proud card-carrying member.
That's interesting, though, because you were already pretty accomplished by that point. You were an Academy Award nominee. So it was your first American film, I guess?
Yes, yeah, it was a big adventure to, with our first film, Henry V, it was a series of such sort of lucky chances. As our business often is, you know, you work away and sometimes all the cliches apply, the right person, the right time, and I had a crazy dream about wanting to make a film of Henry V, and then met a similarly sort of crazy producer who was determined to produce such a film, and from that to suddenly even be out here and be considered to be in American movies was a great big step that was very surprising, very thrilling. And it never, I'd still get a kick out, I'd fly into this town and it still seems amazing to me that I have friends here and I've had a career that's been partly here, and I feel very blessed. But it was always a surprise. Things you dream about, and when the dreams turn out to come true, it's really it's a beautiful thing.
And as a side note, Dead Again gave me a phobia of scissors that lasted for about 5 years, as I recall.
Derek Jacobi, who appears in that film as the character Manson, which is a cunning play on words for those of you who've seen that, without a bit of a spoiler alert in there, but he had to, we had to do a fight sequence in that. He had to jump onto a pair of scissors. He had to fly through the air, land on a pair of scissors. I can't tell you whether he died or not in the story, but
it's been 30 years. I think
exactly. No, he did, and he did. Yeah. And he hurt himself as well. He's never forgiven me for that. Yeah. We also did a fight scene where we were flying around this apartment, and we'd both done lots of fight training in Shakespeare and plays and all the rest of it, and I had to grab his head and smash it against the top of a shelf, and we practiced it endlessly, and I said, remember, Derek, I will just have my hand on the top of your head, I will not push it, you're the one doing that, so you sell the hit, but whatever you do, of course, stop. Don't really hit your head on the very hard piece of wood that we were working. And we got there, and he said it was me, but he flung his head back, and he smashed his head into this thing, and had to stop. And he'd been so sort of passionate and excited, and then everything stopped. He just turned around and went, oh. He had to stop. He's okay now.
I'm laughing, but I actually realized maybe I shouldn't be.
Well, no, he laughed in the end, but he's never let me forget it.
So I was thinking, when I was watching this movie, with the possible exception of Christopher Marlowe, your name might be the most associated with William Shakespeare. And I have to think that carries a certain, it's flattering, but there has to be a certain responsibility that comes with that.
Well, film really started, you know, from the beginnings of a relationship with Shakespeare, which was me at 16 hitchhiking to Stratford-upon-Avon, where with a tent. It was the first time I'd ever done anything like that on my own, really, and I was fairly scared, but I was very, very determined. I knew that I wanted to go to the place where Shakespeare had been born and lived and returned to, as per this film. And I went and I saw plays at the Royal Shakespeare Company. I queued for return tickets, and I went backstage, and in the day I would go and visit the Shakespeare places. And it began a kind of, and I'm a working class boy from Belfast. I ended up in Reading, which is just outside London. So to go to the theatre is already strange. My family don't do that. Showbiz generally is like a faraway place. This is as far away as we can possibly imagine. But I went and started to try and put the pieces together between the man and the work. So the work, I'd begun to understand because I'd started to see some productions and had some teachers who let me understand how real Shakespeare could be, how meaningful it could be, how much it reflected my own life, how demanding and brilliant it could be for you if you were an aspiring performer. And it was also kind of inspiring to me to know that at least if you believe the version of Shakespeare that is the man from Stratford, that he didn't particularly come from he didn't have a classical education, and he may or may not have finished his grammar school, and to some extent there was a sort of normality to his real existence that was a comfort to me. It felt like, well, as it were, if he could do it, then maybe he can inspire all the rest of us to do it. So it was then the beginning of trying to work out how that went with the work, trying to find that man. I tried to find him when I was 16, wandering around those places, and I tried to find him in the movie as well, partly because, to answer your question, I do feel a big sense of responsibility, not because I take, sweet as it is that you say that, but I do know that the power of film means that we've had an association with Shakespeare, who's always done way, way, way more for us than we've ever done for him, but at least for this little pocket of time there is responsibility, and some of that responsibility, I think, is to at least in talking about him, try and do one's best to understand the kind of guy he was, and also in a way, in the film is that as well as a sort of thank you. The man has given me a career, so I'm very, believe me, I'm very, very grateful for it.
This may sound like kind of a strange question, but I'm curious if you put any special research into this film, because you've probably been researching him for the last 30, 40 years.
Well, it's interesting. Once you focus on this, so what you see here, the title "All Is True," as you can tell, it's the subtitle, if you like, of Shakespeare's last play, Henry VIII. He called it "All Is True," and there was a line from Judy's character in the film saying, William Shakespeare writes a play about King Henry VIII and calls it "All Is True." He's got a bloody nerve, because of course Shakespeare knew no more about the details in between the facts of the life of Henry VIII than we know about Shakespeare. However, we do know quite a lot about him. And particularly we know quite a lot about what happened when he retired to Stratford. We know that the Globe Theatre did burn down on that night, on June 29th, 1613, and it was traumatizing, and he did leave, and he did never write another play, and he did go to Stratford, and he did have the second best house in the town, and he did pay £20, or about $5,000, for a coat of arms that allowed him to be called gentleman, and he did have two daughters involved in sexual scandals, and John Lane did stand up in that church, and he did say that she was having an affair, and he did say that she had gonorrhea, and Thomas Quiney, it's all public, it's all in the public record in Stratford. Thomas Quiney did have an affair with Margaret Wheeler, and she did, alas, tragically die in childbirth. And 6 weeks after he'd married Judy Shakespeare, Thomas Quiney, as his punishment, was required to turn up for 3 successive Sundays in Stratford in a hair shirt in front of the congregation by way of atonement for that. We know that he left Anne his second best bed. And we know that sonnets were dedicated to the Earl of Southampton. In between, what we did was what Shakespeare did regularly, was to try and imagine. And what we imagined was from the material of the plays themselves. So in the last years of Shakespeare's life, not long after we see him here, he had been writing The Tempest and The Winter's Tale and Cymbeline and Pericles, plays that deal with lost children, plays that deal with the drive to reunite families, plays that deal with difficult relationships between fathers and daughters. He is similarly obsessed with the death of children in other plays, and with preoccupation with twins and how extraordinary twins are, the sort of symbiotic relationship that they can have, and so all of those things, including with one consonant change, that the name of his dead son Hamlet, change it to an L, and you get Hamlet, one of his most famous plays, where inside it there is a suicide, it would seem, by drowning, it would seem, by a child who has a very difficult relationship with their father. So all of that material, the preoccupations of Shakespeare, the artist, were used to fill in the gaps between the facts of Shakespeare, the man's life. That's where we. So that ended up meaning quite a lot of research, and for me, quite a lot of things that I certainly wasn't as aware of as the film made me.
I mean, I have to admit, I'm so fascinated that you chose to focus on the last 3 years of his life, because it's a story that I haven't seen told, and it is fascinating. And I only knew it was true because I checked Wikipedia later, and I was like, oh my God, that's not true. It had to be. But you went to an amazing writer, Ben Elton, who it's surprising to me, you guys have never worked together before, except you directed him.
That's right. He was Verges in Much Ado About Nothing, and we met 30 years ago when I was in a production of that play in the theatre in London, directed by Judi Dench. And Ben came to see it, and he said, "You made some of that up, didn't you?" I said, "I didn't make it up. I swear to God, we're trying to do it as naturally as possible, but this is Shakespeare's gift for very direct, recognizable speech. Much Ado About Nothing is mostly in prose; it's not in poetry." And so he went back to the script. He said, "Well, you were right. You weren't making it up, but isn't he clever?" I said, "He is. He's very clever." You should write something about him. We tried to do a couple of projects across the years that didn't quite work out, but at the beginning of this year, Ben asked me to be a small part in a Christmas special episode of his sitcom Upstart Crow, which is in its third season for the BBC, about Shakespeare. Very funny sitcom take on Shakespeare with some very brilliant people in it. We started talking about Shakespeare again, and I said, "Would you ever write a drama about him now you've done all this research?" Because I think there's a really fascinating story about the last 3 years of his life. So we started working on it, and it was one of those things that came together so quickly, and off we went.
That was at the start of this year?
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah. Well, when I say you're the third group to see this film, it's correct. This is what in the old days, when we made films on film, this would be called a wet print, because it had just literally come from the laboratory, so the cameras were still dripping off it.
I also want to talk about the physical transformation, because, and I think you'll take this as a compliment, it took me a few minutes to realize that was you. Yeah. And it doesn't look like makeup, because nothing takes you out of a movie quicker than bad makeup or a bad wig. And then I realized, oh, there he is. He's playing William Shakespeare. That's actually him. It is a phenomenal transformation. How did you pull it off?
Well, thank you very much. I began the process by going to the National Portrait Gallery in London, and there's a painting in there. It's called NPG1. It's the very first painting that building ever acquired in 1847, and it's the reproduction is the image you see at the very front of the movie. That brief snatch of the portrait is what's called the Chandos portrait of Shakespeare. It was painted by somebody called John Taylor in around about 1608. And although everything about Shakespeare is subject to passionate dispute and speculation, the weight of evidence seems to suggest that that painting was the one Shakespeare sat for, and is the one that he is most likely to resemble. So I went to the National Portrait Gallery, and I sat in front of that painting, or stood, you can't sit, but I stood in front of it on numerous occasions, kept going back. And it was when I was thinking, well, could I play Shakespeare with just as me, with some kind of beard or something, and try, because I wanted it to be real. I thought, does that help set up something original? But in fact, in the painting, this Chandos portrait, it has a sort of Mona Lisa effect. So the eyes are looking straight ahead. So if you stand in front of it, it really appears to be looking at you. You end up feeling you're having a conversation. And I also am aware that no reproduction of an old master ever really quite captures the thing itself. So the eyes in that painting in the National Portrait Gallery are so particular, they're so warm, they're so wry and humorous, they're sad in some ways, they're questioning, but they seem liquid. They seemed real to me. So that already started to say, somehow I should try and look like that, and the one thing I won't do is put contact lenses in his, because then it's a sort of complete mask. Because what I want to get is the soul and the soulfulness in those eyes, but it should be inside this. So I'll try and get rid of all the rest of me, but the one thing that would be hidden by contact lenses, in this case, I'll remove, and and I'll try and find my way back to that interior life that portrait revealed. And that was the beginnings of the inspiration. Then it was half a dozen lengthy tests to work out how to best do the prosthetic piece, and then Vanessa White, brilliant makeup artist, and Neil Gordon, fantastic prosthetics designer, found this way to do it. And they knew because I was directing it, they had to do it swiftly, so we did many, many tests so that in the end, on a daily basis, it would take 2 hours. And so I'd be in the chair at 5:30, we'd go on set at 7:30.
I mean, 2 hours sounds horrible, but I would have guessed closer to 6.
Yeah.
So it's actually pretty impressive.
To start with, it
Yeah.
was longer, but they both worked on it together. They were very quick. They knew that it was important to me, just time-wise. I needed to get back out there, and although the actors were happy to see it, no one had any sympathy for me. They just wanted to be in the scenes and be being directed.
I actually want to talk about this amazing cast. Starting with, I know you've worked with Judi Dench numerous times. Is there ever a time that she was intimidating to you, or is it? I just imagine she's just like sitting in your hallway waiting for scripts.
No, she's always intimidating to me, actually. Well, she knows me well, so she's unimpressed by me in every single way. So she'll just say no or shut up if I'm saying something inappropriate or foolish or stupid. But I'll tell you how she came to be in this, which is typical of Judi. When it first came up, Anne Hathaway is 9 years older than Shakespeare. Judi is a little older than to me, as it were, but it seemed immaterial to me. And so we asked if she was available. She wasn't. We thought about some other people. I kept coming back to this idea, which was my first idea. And before we approached anyone else, I said to Tamar Thomas, my fellow producer, could we just check, just in case maybe something's happened? As luck would have it, for us anyway, a project she was doing had fallen through. She had become available, but it was a very narrow window of opportunity. And so I said, well, look, can I go down there tonight? Can I go to her cottage in the country? Can I pitch it, please? And just hope and keep everything crossed. I had to go into a meeting. When I came out of the meeting, Tamar said, Judi says you can't come down tonight. She's sorry. You should save the petrol. It doesn't matter what it is. It's a yes. Class, isn't it? And you'll know. I mean, I don't know how many times that happens with actors. I mean, where we get that, where you feel you're lucky enough to be asked and you say yes. Or from the other point of view, I can tell you that someone should say that like that. It just made me cry at the time. It was it's a lovely, lovely thing. So.
You can't be too intimidated by her though, because she told me a story about when you did Coriolanus and she twisted her foot.
Yes.
Do you know the one I'm talking about?
Well, go on. She says something.
She twisted her foot. A doctor had to come on stage, and so you let her take the final curtain call, even though you were the lead. And then supposedly you said to her,
"Well, she says that I said, get off the stage, you limping bitch." I promised that my head would not be on my shoulders, but I said she'd have just smacked me around the face. And then they had given her a lot of painkillers. Judi Dench was high.
so you didn't say that to her?
You may say that. I couldn't possibly comment.
I like, well, in either she's high or she lied. I don't know if it's on great in either version, but yeah, I'm going to stick with it.
Okay.
But that is, how many times have you worked together?
I think it's 8 or 9 times, actually. The first time I was her son in a production of Ibsen's Ghosts on television, and we met in a rehearsal room at the BBC, and it was just incredibly intimate. It was her and Michael Gambon, the late great Natasha Richardson, Freddie Jones. It was a great play, so it was a wonderful experience, and we hit it off.
And then, Ian McKellen comes in for one scene, like walks away with the whole movie. Isn't that and have you guys ever worked on film together before?
No, we haven't worked together before.
That was my question, but I can't believe that.
Yeah. Well, he reminds me, I did ask him 30 years ago to be in Henry V, but he declined. He then says that ever since then, Derek Jacobi has stolen all the parts he's he's been pretty busy. It was a joy to work with a pair of them, and a great privilege to work with Ian, which was the only time in the film. Essentially, we worked with one camera, and the camera was never on a crane. It was never on a dolly track. It only ever tilted or pan, and we used one camera until the day with Ian, where we used two cameras, because I knew that we should try and capture in this very tense, very unusual scene. It's a great scene on the page from Ben Elton, I think. Very unusual when you've been following the story of this heterosexual relationship at the center of this ordinarily troubled family, to then suddenly, as if somehow you met the person you were in love with when you were 18, suddenly this person comes back into your life and could take you away from all of this as he's trying to sort out what is meaningful to him now about his life and where he should be. To do that and suddenly suggest that that's where William Shakespeare's passion lies, I think is a really quite a modern, we're very used to now, fluent scenarios in all our families. But then, I think it's a very positive surprise that makes for, a very interesting twist in the relationship with Anne, and for Ian and I, it was a joy to play. So we cross shooting in order to capture every little, mini reaction, and it felt like a kind of chess match. Also because all the nighttime scenes were shot, interior nighttime scenes was shot only with candles, so that when we walked into that room and sat by the fire, really the light falls away, you can't really see where any of our cameras were and the crew, so suddenly it felt like me and the Earl of Southampton were back in 16, and playing this extraordinary scene where, which ends up being a curious love scene where Shakespeare dares to declare his love through his extraordinary poetry, particularly this sonnet, and then has to face the idea that, which is quite universal, that many of us are familiar with. Yes, I love you, but I don't love you in that way.
Man, when you said that to me just now, I took it like a little
I do love you. So it was a great scene to play. It was one I I spent a lot of time preparing for that, because I really didn't want to let him down, and it was a great honour to play with him and to just talk to him about. He's a fantastic spokesman on behalf of actors around the world. He's so eloquent and articulate. He believes in actors. He is so devoted to the craft of acting and to what actors can do. He doesn't over exaggerate, but he's very accurate. He honours what actors do in a very, very beautiful and inspiring way, pragmatic and generous and compassionate, and so it's great to hear him speak about what we do.
It's such an interesting scene too, because you talk about sort of filling in the blanks of what we know and what we can imagine, and there was so much unrequited love in Shakespeare's writings that it's just like, I watched that scene and was like, oh, so much makes sense.
Yeah, well, it's, yes, unrequited love, and also to face this thing, which again I think is quite recognizable, that it's multi-layered. On one level, there's this terrible crushing blow when he says, you've got no business to love me, you're not of my class, you're a peasant. And you can buy all the shields you want in the world. You can spend 20 quid, or it would have been about $5,000 back then. You can spend that on a shield, but that's never going to put you in line to love me. And what then Ben does in a fascinating way, to give Ian McKellen the same sonnet to speak back, offers this weird sort of code, this sort of coded version, as if I can't say that I love you, but here I am, as it were, repeating our song, and also, in a way, being this extraordinary thing, that someone who appreciates so deeply the talent of the other man, which in itself is a sort of an amazing gift to someone like Shakespeare, but it doesn't always come in all the neat human ways. It doesn't involve, in this case, if that's what he wants or thinks he wants, romantic love. So it's very sensitive and sensitized and strange. It also has a weird thriller quality. And Ian said, what, any advice about this? I said, well, just based on how this movie's working, I'd say the only thing, he doesn't need any help from me, but if I may humbly offer an observation based on what we've been doing, it would be to move as little as possible. So if I can give you a really superficial note, is don't move your head. Just look at each other, because the scene and the words are so electric. If one can, because that also will lead to a strange tension. Because you will want to move, you will, because people do. But if you don't, as if every word is charged and loaded, something else happens as well. So we had a go at that, and I think it also focused something in a scene that was great. But with people like him, people like Dench, if you're lucky enough to find something of some value to say, then they take it and run with it and transform it in ways that are so brilliant to watch.
Well, you also have a great eye for spotting kind of upcoming talents. And can you talk a little bit about some of the actors we might not be familiar with, particularly those playing Shakespeare's daughters?
Yeah, so Catherine Wilder plays Judith. We gave her first job 3 years ago in our theatre company. She came and she played Mopsa, who's one of the country maids in The Winter's Tale, which Judi Dench was in, and I was in. It was also a story about a family who lose a son and who try to reunite the family. She then, in the same season, understudied Juliet in Romeo and Juliet, a great play about love, requited and unrequited. Lily James, our Cinderella, played Juliet. She was off for a week, she had flu. Catherine Wilder took over, played Juliet for a week in the West End, and was fantastic. She had a tiny part in Murder on the Orient Express, and was a natural for this. So she's a lady of loose morals.
Oh, I know
at the
exactly what you're
beginning
talking about.
of the
Yes,
play with
in the
Tom
beginning.
Bateman.
Yeah.
And so she, the rapport that she had with Judy, because also that was important. So she had worked with Judy enough to just get rid of the intimidation factor. So that was good, and me. She did no intimidation to me. So that sort of familiarity, father-daughter thing was good. And Lydia Wilson, we'd seen in the theatre, but she was new to our company. But the boys had all been in our theatre season. People like Jimmy Yule, who played Edward Woolmer, the vicar, was in Henry V 30 years ago. We use lots of new people each time, but there is a larger continuity that's made up of this sort of film theatre family.
It's kind of like having your own repertory company.
Well, what's beautiful about it is, because this happened so quickly, and Lucy Bevan and Emily Brockman, our casting director, said that it was the only time in their entire careers that they had a 100% yes response rate to the script.
Wow.
So that was a very beautiful thing to. So that when that happens, things can happen quickly.
Yeah, that's amazing. I want to take some questions from the audience. If you have any, you can raise your hand. I see one there on the edge.
I want to thank you, and I'm sure everyone else in this theater, thank you for all the years that you've brought us so many wonderful films that made us sit on the edge of our seats, or made us laugh, or educated us more. And this all is true. This should be played to all school children and high schools and colleges, because it really brings Shakespeare, as a human being. And you're really the person that's presented in this way. And my question is, I have the thrill of being able to ask you a question, is the reason why so many of your films have such depth and emotion is because you're from Ireland, but you came really sad. And I was like, oh God, I hurt his feelings. I don't know if you remember that.
So are you re-asking the question that made it sad? Okay.
Well,
Coming from Ireland, I guess.
well, thank you very, very much. Thank you very much for your kind words. And the Irish love words, don't they? I mean, lots of cultures love it. So this is just the Irish take on it. The Irish are beautifully akin to the rest of the planet's population, but their variation on this is that they love a bit of melancholy. They like those airs, they like those songs that make you cry. I was brought up listening to things like Danny Boy. My granny had a brother called Danny, passed away. Every time that song came up, they were all in tears, but it was good for them. It was an inbuilt therapeutic melancholy that was at work. And the Irish love poetry, and they also love to be. They like a kind of a sad story, but I guess there's a sort of, but they certainly, they like to laugh, and they like I think they embrace the yin and yang of all of that, and so I think it's a disposition that encourages you to be as open-hearted as you can. That's what I would find in Shakespeare, and it's what I try to bring to the work that I do.
That's great. Sure, right there, sir.
Ken, congratulations. Where was it Warwickshire for how long? And I first saw you as Jimmy Cagney in Hammersmith.
Wow.
When was that? 84 or
That
something?
was 87. Thank you very much for this. I did a play about a Belfast fella impersonating Jimmy Cagney at talent contests, and then the story got a little darker after that. But if anybody had seen it, you know why I like thrillers. I was always drawn to them. But we went to Warwickshire, we went to Stratford to look to see if we could shoot there, but in fact, because the world goes to Stratford, it's pretty hard, you know, in terms of what we might have achieved there. So we found a house quite near Windsor Castle, which was a Tudor house with a church nearby and meadows nearby. We were able to shoot everything there in a place absolutely from the period in which it had been occupied by the same family over generations. A lovely, lovely family, actually. So it really felt like it was a house with life in it, it was a house with kids in it, it was a house with stories. And again, we were able to sort of concentrate our experience there in one of those locations where, this is a low-budget movie where people would be in another room. It was quite funny to see. You'd sometimes walk into a room with just candles, and there's Judi Dench in costume. And it's as if, Christ, I'm on the Shakespeare tour here. And there's the tableau. And then you just, your eyes drop and her coffee cup is by her chair to close the gap. But we managed to shoot relatively.
How long did it take you to film?
We were just under 30 days.
Wow.
So one thing, I don't know what you'd all have felt if you were in a picture and I'd sat opposite you 2 weeks before, maybe it was a little earlier. I had a solo session with everybody, just brought everybody in individually. That's absolutely everybody. Everybody who speaks in the movie, everybody who has anything anybody who's on camera, basically. And particularly those with words. I said, you've got to know these lines inside out. Please assume that every single scene in the movie will be shot in one. It may not be, but assume that, please. And because there'll be enough time to have multiple takes, but there won't be if you're playing catch up on the day. You have to be super ready, be committed. And I would give people a bit of a steer about what I thought, but essentially I'd say, look, I want what you've got. So just go in. Learn those lines, do that research. Everybody had a ton of things to look at. You could go and visit Susanna's house, you could go and visit Quiney's place. There was a trillion conflicting essays you could read about everything and everybody in this story. But what I wanted people to do was to come absolutely tip of the toes ready so that we could capture a kind of happening and work quickly. Trying always with this, I was trying to do it, Ben was trying to do it, is with this picture is try, even though we offer a very sort of reflective sort of palette and we keep the camera still, the goal was to capture acting energy inside that could be very wild and very raw. So we wanted people to be ready, and also we wanted their first instincts. We wanted the gut to be engaged, not too much the head.
I'm curious, Shakespeare finds its way into muscle memory. Could you still do like soliloquies from Henry V to this day? Are they still there?
Not really.
I can't, you gotta be pushing out to make room for other stuff.
Yeah, but essentially I think that happens in a lot of actors' minds. But yeah, it swirls in and it swirls out, and it just phrases swirl in and swirl out. But there's a piece at the end, so talking about what I just mentioned, at the end, when the girls come in and see him and he's on the brink of death, and they say, where do you want to go? And he says, I know a bank where the wild thyme grows, and it's a piece, as you know, from Midsummer Night's Dream. And so I'm doing it, and the line is, where the wild thyme grows, there's a couple of phrases in there, quite over-canopied with luscious woodbine. And I said, in the version we had, quite o'er-canopied. I just remembered it as or. O''er. Sometimes in the text that's the way it is, but really it's over-canopied. Now there's only one person who would have known that little slip, but it's Judi Dench. So as I'm doing it, her eyes just flicker. And so she sits like she goes, you're going to do this, it's going to be here forever, and you're going to say over-canopy, not or-canopy. We're going to say or-canopy, not over-canopy. Now we didn't say anything, but it's like she was going, you're going to cut, you're going to do it again? Well, I'm not going to cut, I kept saying we should try and do a happening here. So I kept going, but at the end of it, and it's in the movie, we got to the end of it, and I said, because she was looking at me like, you just, loser. I said, I finished, there sleeps Titania sometimes in the night, lulled in these flowers with dances and delight. And I looked at her and she was begging to say something, or tell me I was wrong. And I said, and it's in the movie, you probably know the rest of this, don't you? And she went on to say, there the snake sheds his enamel skin, weed wide enough to wrap the berry. It was completely improvised on the day because Judi Dench knows Shakespeare. Shakespeare inside.
I just want to close on a really difficult question. I don't know if you have an answer for this. Do you have a favorite Shakespeare play? Whoa, that was controversial.
Well, it's a sort of impossible question, but you with great music or great works of art or books, anything that people come to them at different points in their lives. This film was one much prodded into existence by the experience of being in Shakespeare's The Winter's Tale, because I found it such a sort of heartbreaking and sort of life-changing experience to be around a story that dealt so humanely with a sort of impossible situation, an impossibly dark situation. And although it partly uses magic to try and solve it, I could feel, at least I felt I could, feel the ache inside that story that Shakespeare had for that lost son in playing Leontes. And there's something about the sort of exquisite tenderness. Maybe it's back to the Irish thing we were talking about. That although he wrote the last plays he wrote were romances, they were fairy stories, if you like. He never really presented life as a fairy story. He presented compassionately life always as a beautifully messy thing. Where, for instance, in a story like this called All Is True, maybe people are not forgiven for misdemeanors or absences. Maybe those acts of behavior are not forgotten, but they are all listened to and they are all heard. And I have an admiration for the Shakespeare family here in their little quiet way of trying to move forward through their own particular family's difficulties, putting one foot in front of another. Nothing easy, nothing permanently resolved, often painful, i.e. that mixture of a bittersweet quality which is at the end of so many of his plays that he suggests maybe life is just inevitably beautifully made up of, and we've got to live with we've got to breathe in with the tough times and really enjoy and love those wonderful times. Winter's Tale encapsulates some of that. It has a largeness of soul, I would say, that is to do with being towards this end of his life, where there's a sort of generosity of spirit that is different from the fantastic entertainer who wrote the brilliant thrillers or the broad comedies or the incisive history plays of early on. Somehow you got to a big, broad, open-hearted Shakespeare in those last plays, sometimes sad, sometimes agonized, sometimes heartbroken, but somehow grabbing at every piece of happiness that was possible, every piece of reconciliation that was possible, every piece of redemption that was possible. And when I experience those plays, or try and tap into it here, where it's reflected in the life of, perhaps in the life of his own family, then I find the work to be so profoundly moving. And so for that reason, at this point in my life, those late plays, and that one in particular, if not a favorite, is something I stand humbly in awe of as a work of art, and say to this great man, thank you very much. Bravo.
I know, right?